Welcome to Marple Whispers, where the faintest murmur conceals a deadly truth. I'm Sean, your guide through a labyrinth of deceit and danger. Every step echoes with secrets, and every shadow hides a motive. Are you ready to unravel the mystery, or become part of it? In the misty shadows of a quaint English village, a dying man stumbles into an ancient church, gasping one final word: sanctuary. But is it a plea for refuge, or a deadly clue? Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, unravelling a web of greed, betrayal, and hidden jewels stolen from London's elite. As suspects whisper alibis and shadows lurk in the churchyard, Marple follows muddy trails, cryptic notes, and a killer's fatal mistake, leading to a shocking confrontation where the sanctuary's holy secrets spill forth in glittering diamonds and cold-blooded murder. Who stabbed the thief? And can Marple expose the accomplice before the village's peace shatters forever? Dive into this mystery, where every whisper hides a lie, and one woman's quiet wisdom cracks the case wide open. Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Nave, the Village of St. Mary Mead lay shrouded in the soft golden haze of a late September afternoon. Its thatched cottages and winding lanes basking in the fleeting warmth of the sun. Autumn had arrived with a whisper, painting the leaves in russet and amber, and carrying on the breeze the faint earthy scent of harvest fields. At the heart of the village stood the ancient church of St. Michael's, its weathered stone tower piercing the sky like a steadfast guardian. Inside, the air was cool and still, infused with the lingering aroma of beeswax candles and polished oak pews. It was here, on this unremarkable Sunday evening, that the ordinary rhythm of village life was shattered by an event as dramatic as it was unforeseen. Reverend Thomas Hargreaves, a mild-mannered man in his late 50s, with a voice that carried the gentle cadence of long-forgotten hymns, was drawing his sermon to a close. His theme was forgiveness, a timely choice, given the minor squabbles that had rippled through the parish over a disputed flower arrangement at the recent fete. The congregation, a familiar assembly of villagers, listened with varying degrees of attentiveness. In the front pew sat the churchwarden, Mr. Elias Pettigrew, a retired silversmith from London whose precise manner and impeccable waistcoat suggested a life of meticulous order. Beside him, young Miss Lydia Ellis, the organist, fidgeted with her hymn book, her fair curls catching the light from the stained-glass windows. Further back, Colonel Arthur Bantry and his wife Dolly occupied their customary seats. Dolly's hat, a confection of feathers and silk, drawing more than a few admiring glances. Among the visitors that evening was Miss Jane Marple, an elderly spinster from the nearby village of St. Mary Mead's more secluded end, though she had ventured out at Dolly Bantry's insistent invitation for a weekend of quiet companionship. Miss Marple sat primly in her pew, her blue eyes sharp behind her spectacles, her hands busily employed with a pair of knitting needles that clicked softly like the ticking of a distant clock. She wore a simple black dress adorned with a brooch of seed pearls, and her expression was one of serene observation, as if the world around her were a vast tapestry from which she could pluck the loosest threads. Dolly, ever the gracious hostess, had whispered earlier about the vicar's improving oratory, but Miss Marple's mind wandered to the faces in the crowd, the subtle tensions, the unspoken alliances that bound a small community like this one. As Reverend Hargreaves intoned his final benediction, The heavy oak door at the rear of the nave groaned open with a sound that cut through the hush like a knife. Heads turned in unison, a ripple of curiosity spreading through the assembly. Framed in the doorway stood a man, tall, gaunt, his clothes rumpled and streaked with the grime of travel. He staggered forward, one hand pressed to his side, where a dark, ominous stain seeped through the fabric of his shirt. His face was ashen, etched with lines of pain and desperation, and his breath came in laboured gasps that echoed unnaturally in the vaulted space. The congregation froze, a collective breath held in suspense. The man lurched down the aisle. His boots, heavy, mud-caked things that spoke of long miles, trudged across damp fields, thudding unevenly on the flagstone floor. He reached the chancel steps, his free hand grasping at the air as if seeking an invisible support. Then, with a final, trembling effort, he collapsed at the foot of the altar, his body crumpling like a discarded marionette. "Sanctuary," he whispered, the word escaping his lips in a hoarse, fervent plea that reverberated off the stone walls and into the stunned silence. His eyes, wide and imploring, flickered once more before glazing over in the unmistakable fixity of death. For a heartbeat, the church remained suspended in shock. Then chaos erupted. Gasps, murmurs, a woman's stifled cry. Reverend Hargreaves hurried forward, his cassock swishing, kneeling beside the fallen stranger with a murmured prayer. Colonel Bantry rose swiftly, his military bearing asserting itself as he barked orders for someone to fetch the doctor. Dolly Bantry clutched her husband's arm, her face pale beneath her rouge. Miss Ellis half rose from her seat, then sank back, her hands trembling. Miss Marple, however, did not stir immediately. Her knitting needles paused mid-stitch, and she leaned forward ever so slightly, her keen gaze absorbing every detail. The man's boots, she noted, bore the reddish clay of the pits near the old manor house on the village outskirts, not the common black soil of the surrounding fields. His hands were rough, calloused from labour, yet his nails were clean, suggesting a recent attempt at respectability. Around his neck, partially obscured by his collar, glinted a thin gold chain, too fine, perhaps, for a mere itinerant worker. And that word, sanctuary, uttered not with the desperation of a hunted soul seeking holy refuge, but with a deliberate clarity, as if it were a message meant for ears beyond the divine. "How very extraordinary," Miss Marple murmured to Dolly, who had turned to her with wide eyes. "One doesn't often see such drama in a country church." "But mark my words, my dear, this isn't about spiritual asylum. No, there's something far more worldly at play here." By the time the local constable, a sturdy young man named Polk, arrived on his bicycle, the scene had settled into a grim tableau. The body was covered with the altar cloth, and the villagers milled about in clusters whispering speculations. Papers from the man's pocket identified him as Arthur Langton, aged 42, a labourer from the East End of London, with no apparent connections to St. Mary Mead. A cursory examination revealed the cause: a single precise stab wound to the ribs, the blade having pierced vital organs with lethal efficiency. Murder, without a doubt, and in the house of God no less. As the evening shadows lengthened and the church bells tolled mournfully, Miss Marple stepped outside into the crisp air, her mind already weaving patterns from the fragments she had observed. The village, so placid on the surface, harboured secrets like any other place touched by human frailty. And this stranger's dying whisper? It was the first loose end in what promised to be a most intriguing knot. Chapter 2. Shadows of Suspicion. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a reluctant greyness, as if the sky itself mourned the intrusion of violence into its serene domain. Mist clung to the hedgerows like spectral veils, and the air carried a chill that seeped into the bones, whispering of secrets unearthed and shadows yet to be dispelled. The villagers, accustomed to the gentle ebb and flow of rural life, market days, garden teas, and the occasional spat over boundary fences, found themselves thrust into a drama that belonged more to the lurid pages of a London tabloid than their quiet corner of England. Whispers flew from cottage to cottage. Who was this Arthur Langton? Why had he chosen their church for his final act? And that single haunting word, sanctuary, what did it truly signify? By mid-morning, the vicarage had become the nerve centre of the investigation. Reverend Hargreaves, his face drawn and his eyes shadowed from a sleepless night spent in prayer and reflection, bustled about the parlour, ensuring that the silver tea service gleamed and the fire crackled invitingly in the grate. The room was a cosy enclave of faded chintz armchairs, bookshelves groaning under theological tomes, and a mantelpiece adorned with family photographs. Smiling children now grown and scattered. A reminder of happier times. Mrs. Hargreaves, a plump, efficient woman with a no-nonsense air, hovered nearby, her apron dusted with flour from a hasty batch of scones baked to fortify the gathering souls. Inspector Derek Craddock of the County Police arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, his black Ford pulling up with a crunch of gravel that seemed to echo the gravity of his purpose. He was a man in his early 40s, tall and lean, with a sharp jawline and eyes that missed nothing, eyes honed by years of sifting truth from deception in the bustling precincts of the nearby town. His suit was impeccably pressed, his tie a sober navy, and he carried a notebook that bore the scars of countless cases. Accompanying him was Sergeant Fletcher, a burly subordinate whose ruddy cheeks and deferential nod suggested a man more at home with facts than finesse. Reverend? Craddock greeted Hargreaves with a firm handshake, his voice clipped and authoritative. A nasty business, this. Murder in a church. Shakes the foundations, doesn't it? We'll need to speak with everyone who was present last evening. No stone unturned, as they say. The vicar nodded solemnly, ushering them into the parlour where the key witnesses had assembled. Mr. Elias Pettigrew sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, his fingers drumming a silent tattoo on the armrest. At 55, he was a figure of precise elegance. Silver hair combed back, a gold watch chain glinting across his waistcoat, and an expression of controlled indignation, as if the events had offended his sense of order. Miss Lydia Ellis perched on the edge of a settee, her youthful prettiness marred by red-rimmed eyes and a handkerchief twisted in her lap. She was barely 25, with porcelain skin and a cascade of golden curls that now hung limp, as though the horror had drained their vitality. Colonel Bantry stood by the window, his moustache bristling with military vigour, while Dolly Bantry fussed with her gloves, her vivacious nature subdued, but not extinguished. Sir Henry Clithering, the retired Scotland Yard Commissioner, lounged in an armchair, his keen gaze surveying the room like a hawk eyeing potential prey. And in a quiet corner, almost overlooked amid the tension, sat Miss Jane Marple, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, a picture of unassuming tranquility. Craddock wasted no time. "Let's begin with the facts," he said, flipping open his notebook. "The deceased, Arthur Langton, entered the church during the service, uttered the word sanctuary, and expired from a stab wound. Constable Polk's initial report confirms no weapon at the scene. Now, Reverend, you were closest. Describe it again, if you will." Hargreaves cleared his throat, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "It was just after the benediction." The door opened. No, burst open, really. And this poor fellow staggered in. He made it to the altar, collapsed, and whispered sanctuary. I thought at first he sought asylum, in the old medieval sense, refuge from peril. Perhaps he was pursued by some enemy, and the church was his last hope. Craddock's pen scratched across the page. Possible, but in these modern times, sanctuary doesn't hold legal water. More likely a delusion from blood loss. Sergeant, note that down. He turned to Pettigrew. "You were locking the vestry earlier, I understand. See anything unusual?" Pettigrew straightened, his tone measured. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Inspector. I ensure the silver and vestments are secure after each service. Force of habit from my days in London." The man entered from the main door. I was at the side. Heard the commotion, rushed out, but he was already down. "And you, Miss Ellis?" Craddock's gaze softened slightly as he addressed the young woman. She dabbed at her eyes. "I was at the organ, playing the recessional." The door creaked, and I turned. He looked so dreadful, clutching his side, blood everywhere. I froze, Inspector, simply froze. By the time I moved, it was over. Craddock nodded, his expression inscrutable. Anyone else notice peculiarities? His clothing, manner? Colonel Bantry harumphed. Seemed a rough sort. Boots caked in mud, like he'd tramped across half the county, not local, that's certain. Dolly leaned forward eagerly. Oh, but his eyes, wild, desperate, and that word sanctuary. It sent shivers down my spine, like something from a Gothic novel. Sir Henry chuckled dryly. Quite. But novels aside, Inspector, have you examined his effects? Craddock reached into his pocket and produced a small envelope. Pockets yielded this: a few shillings and pence, a return train ticket from London Paddington, dated Friday last, and this crumpled note. He unfolded it carefully. A scrap of paper with an address scrawled in pencil. 14 Wharf Lane, Whitechapel. No signature, no other marks. Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, her eyes flicking to the note. She said nothing, but her mind raced. Whitechapel, an area rife with shadows, where the desperate and the devious mingled. And the ticket, why a return if his journey ended in death? The inspector continued his rounds, probing alibis and observations. Pettigrew had been in the vestry alone. Miss Ellis at her post, the Bantrys in their pew. Sir Henry, ever the professional, offered a few pointed questions of his own, earning a respectful nod from Craddock. As the interviews wound down, tea was served, strong, fortifying brew, with scones that crumbled like the facade of normalcy in the room. Miss Marple accepted her cup with a gracious smile, her gaze drifting to the window where the mist had begun to lift, revealing the church tower in stark relief. "Inspector," she ventured softly, her voice like a gentle breeze stirring leaves. "Might I inquire about the mud on Mr. Langton's boots?" It seemed rather specific. Reddish clay, not the black earth from the lanes hereabouts. Craddock paused, teacup halfway to his lips. "Observant of you, Miss Marple, is it?" "Yes, we noted that. Likely from the old clay pits near Goslington Manor, a mile or so out, suggests he came that way, perhaps hiding or meeting someone, or fleeing, Sir Henry interjected, his interest piqued. Jane, you've a reputation for these puzzles. Any theories brewing? Miss Marple demurred with a modest shake of her head. Oh, nothing concrete, Sir Henry. But people are so like one another, aren't they? That mud reminds me of young Tommy Pierce, the gardener's boy back home. He once tracked similar clay into the drawing room after pinching apples from the orchard. Turned out he'd been meeting a girl in the pits. Quite innocent, but the lie was in the details. Dolly laughed nervously. Jane, you do see the world through such a lens. But murder? In our church? Indeed, Craddock said, setting down his cup. We'll canvass the village for sightings. Someone must have seen him arrive. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, chatting idly with Mrs. Hargreaves about the parish flower rota, a topic that masked her deeper ruminations. The note from Whitechapel tugged at her thoughts. It evoked memories of a distant cousin who had fallen on hard times in the East End, entangled in petty crimes that escalated to tragedy. Langton, with his labourer's hands but fine gold chain, struck her as a man straddling worlds, perhaps a drifter, but one with ambitions beyond his station. Outside, the village stirred to life. At the Blue Boar Inn, a sturdy establishment with low beams and a roaring fire, the landlord, Mr. Josiah Croft, regaled patrons with tales of the previous day's odd visitor. Tall chap, shifty eyes, he boomed to a cluster of farmers nursing pints. Argued with another fellow, city type, sharp suit. Something about debts and fair shares. Left in a huff, both of 'em. Word reached Craddock by luncheon, prompting a swift visit to the inn. Croft repeated his account under the inspector's scrutiny. Langton had arrived Saturday afternoon, taken a room, and met the stranger, described as ferret-faced with a Cockney accent, in the tap-room. They huddled in the corner, voices low but heated. Caught words like split it even and safe spot. Thought it gamblers' talk. Craddock's interest sharpened. This other man, name, description? Called himself Victor, I think. Slade, maybe? Thin moustache, nervous twitch. Paid in cash, vanished after. A telegram to London was dispatched forthwith, seeking records on both men. Meanwhile, back at the Bantry estate, Gossington Hall, a sprawling Georgian pile set amid manicured lawns, Miss Marple joined Dolly for a light meal. The Colonel was out supervising the groundskeeper, leaving the ladies to dissect the morning's events. Dolly, dear, Miss Marple said, buttering a slice of toast, that note from Whitechapel. Does it ring any bells? Your Arthur has connections in London, hasn't he? Dolly's eyes widened. Well, yes, old army chums, but Whitechapel? That's a rough patch. Do you think Langton was a criminal? Not necessarily. But men like him often carry burdens. Remember Mrs. Crump's nephew? He whispered a street name before passing. Led to a hidden will. Last words can be arrows pointing to truth. Their conversation was interrupted by Sir Henry's arrival, his face alight with news. Craddock's on to something. Langton's known to the Met, small-time thief, suspected in a jewel heist last month. Mayfair Mansion, gems vanished clean away. Accomplice rumoured, but no arrests. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. Jewels, sanctuary. The pieces danced in her mind like fireflies, elusive yet illuminating. How fascinating! And the church, such a symbolic choice. Perhaps he wasn't seeking refuge, but revealing a cache. Sir Henry regarded her with admiration. You're ahead of us, Jane. Craddock searching the grounds now. Indeed, across the village green, officers combed the churchyard, their boots sinking into the dew-kissed grass. Pettigrew watched from his cottage window, his face a mask of composure, though his hands clenched the curtain. Miss Ellis, practising scales on her piano at home, faltered on a note, her thoughts replaying the dying man's gasp. As afternoon waned, Craddock convened a smaller group at the vicarage, the Hargreaves, Pettigrew, and Sir Henry. "We've wired London," he announced. "Slade's a pawnshop owner with a record for fencing. Admitted meeting Langton over a debt, but claims innocence. Alibi checks out for the time of death. Witnesses place him on a train back." Pettigrew exhaled audibly. Then the killer's still at large. "Or among us," Craddock said flatly, his eyes scanning faces. "Langton came here for a reason. That clay on his boots, traces led to the pits, where we found signs of a scuffle. Trampled grass, a dropped cigarette end, foreign brand, not local." Miss Ellis, summoned again, grew pale. I smoke occasionally, but English ones. Not accusing, miss," Craddock assured. "Just facts." Miss Marple, invited by Dolly's insistence, arrived in time to hear the exchange. She settled into her chair, her presence a calming influence amid rising tensions. "Inspector, might the note hold more?" Ink can fade, but sometimes impressions remain. Craddock examined it anew, under a magnifying glass borrowed from the vicar. Faint lines emerged, perhaps a map or code. "By Jove, you're right. Looks like coordinates or a sketch." The room buzzed with speculation. Hargreaves pondered biblical parallels. Pettigrew suggested a red herring. But Miss Marple's thoughts turned inward. Human greed, she knew, was a timeless motivator. Like the village postmistress who skimmed stamps, or the curate who borrowed from the poor box, small sins snowballing into catastrophe. Evening fell with a velvet hush, the church bells tolling evensong as if to exorcise the day's ghosts. At Gossington Hall, over sherry, Sir Henry confided in Miss Marple. "Craddock's competent, but misses the nuances. That word sanctuary, it's not random. Langton was pointing us somewhere." She nodded, her eyes twinkling. "Precisely. In my experience, dying declarations are rarely poetic. They're practical, like old Mister. Raphael's riddle that unravelled a fortune. We must look to the church itself, the sanctuary lamp, perhaps. Donated by a jeweller, wasn't it?" Sir Henry stroked his chin. "Pettigrew handled its cleaning recently. Coincidence?" "Coincidences," Miss Marple replied softly, "are often clues in disguise." As night deepened, the village slept uneasily. In his cell-like room at the inn, Slade, if he were innocent, might ponder his narrow escape. Pettigrew polished his watch chain obsessively. Miss Ellis wept into her pillow, and Miss Marple, gazing at the moonlit garden, wove her mental web tighter. Shadows of suspicion lengthened, promising revelations in the days ahead. The murder of Arthur Langton was no random act. It was a thread in a larger tapestry, one she intended to unravel with her customary patience and insight. Chapter 3. The Hidden Trail. The morning sun pierced the mist over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green, where dew still clung to the grass like scattered diamonds. The air was crisp, laced with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, but the idyllic calm belied the undercurrent of unease that had settled over the community. The murder of Arthur Langton in the sacred precincts of St. Michael's church had stirred the village like a stone dropped into a still pond. sending ripples of gossip and speculation through every parlour and pub. By breakfast, the tragedy was the sole topic at every table, from the humblest cottage to the grand dining room of Gossington Hall, where Miss Jane Marple sat opposite Dolly Bantry, nibbling a slice of toast with her usual air of quiet attentiveness. The vicarage, meanwhile, buzzed with activity as Inspector Craddock marshalled his forces. His sharp eyes, accustomed to the gritty realities of urban crime, now scanned the pastoral landscape for clues as elusive as the morning mist. Sergeant Fletcher, his dependable shadow, had returned from a dawn sweep of the churchyard, his boots muddy and his notebook brimming with observations. The villagers, though eager to assist, offered little beyond vague sightings and fervent theories. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, swore she'd seen a stranger loitering near the Lich Gate on Saturday, his hat pulled low. Old Mr. Gibbs, the sexton, muttered about city folk bringing trouble. But concrete evidence remained frustratingly scarce. Miss Marple, having declined a second cup of tea at Dolly's insistence, excused herself for a constitutional stroll to the churchyard. Her black lace-up shoes crunched softly on the gravel path, and her knitted shawl, worked in a delicate pattern of her own design, kept the autumn chill at bay. She carried her basket, ostensibly for collecting late-season blackberries, but her true purpose was to observe. The church, with its Norman tower and ivy-clad walls, loomed ahead, its ancient stones seeming to guard secrets as old as the village itself. She paused by the Lich Gate, her keen eyes tracing the path Langton must have taken in his final desperate flight. The ground was churned here, not just by his heavy boots, but by another set of prints, smaller, lighter, with a deliberate tread that suggested stealth rather than haste. 2 sets of footprints, she murmured to herself, crouching to inspect the earth. The reddish clay, so distinct from the village's loamy soil, clung to the grass like a stain. It matched the mud caked on Langton's boots, pointing unmistakably to the clay pits near Goslington Manor, a derelict estate a mile beyond the village. The second set, however, intrigued her more. They were fresh, pressed into the softer earth beside the path, and bore the faint imprint of a patterned sole, perhaps a gentleman's shoe or a lady's with an unusually sturdy heel. Someone followed him, she said softly, her mind conjuring parallels to a long-ago incident in her own village, where a poacher's tracks had led to a stolen silver teapot buried under a hedge. Returning to the church, Miss Marple slipped inside, where the air was cool and heavy with the scent of old hymnals. The nave was empty save for Mr. Pettigrew, who stood near the chancel, polishing a brass candlestick with a vigour that seemed almost defiant. His silver hair gleamed under the light streaming through the stained-glass window, depicting Saint. Michael slaying the dragon, a fitting image, Miss Marple thought, for a village now wrestling with its own demons. "Good morning, Mr. Pettigrew," she greeted, her tone mild but her eyes sharp. "You're most diligent, tending to the church's treasures at such a time." He started slightly, his cloth pausing mid-stroke. "Miss Marple, isn't it? Duty doesn't pause for tragedy, I'm afraid. The candlesticks won't polish themselves, and the vicar likes things orderly." "Quite right," she agreed, settling onto a pew and retrieving her knitting from her basket. "Order is so comforting in chaos. I suppose you've had much to do, with the recent repairs to the roof and that splendid sanctuary lamp." Pettigrew's lips tightened, though his expression remained courteous. "The lamp." "Yes, I cleaned it last week. Dust from the repairs, you know. Settles everywhere." "How meticulous of you," she replied, her needles clicking rhythmically. "It's a fine piece, donated by old Mr. Haverford, wasn't it? A jeweller by trade, I believe Dolly mentioned indeed," Pettigrew said, resuming his polishing with a touch more force. "Silver? Antique? Worth a pretty penny, though it's purely ornamental now." Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the faint tremor in his voice, the way his eyes darted to the sanctuary, the sacred area around the altar where Langton had fallen. The lamp hung above, its silver surface gleaming, a hollow relic of a bygone era when oil fueled its ill light. She filed the observation away, much like she stored snippets of village gossip, each a thread in the tapestry she was beginning to weave. By noon, Craddock summoned the key witnesses back to the vicarage for further questioning, his patience fraying as leads dwindled. The parlour, still fragrant with Mrs. Hargreaves's scones, was now a stage for mounting tension. Miss Lydia Ellis arrived, her face pale and her hands clutching a lace handkerchief as if it were a lifeline. Colonel Bantry strode in with military precision, while Dolly fluttered behind, her curiosity undimmed by the grim circumstances. Sir Henry Clithering, invited as a courtesy for his Scotland Yard pedigree, took his usual armchair, his presence lending an air of gravitas. Miss Marple, at Dolly's insistence, joined them, her unassuming demeanour belying the sharpness of her intellect. Craddock stood by the mantelpiece, his notebook open. "We've had a development," he announced, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "A telegram from London confirms Arthur Langton's identity beyond doubt. He was no mere labourer. Known to the Metropolitan Police as a petty thief, he's suspected in a jewel heist 3 weeks ago at Lady Ashford's Mayfair residence. Diamonds, emeralds, a sapphire necklace, total value over £10,000. Vanished without a trace, and Langton with them." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Dolly's hand flew to her throat. "Jewels!" "Here, in St. Mary Mead." "Possibly," Craddock said. "The Met believes he had an accomplice, a second man, never identified. Langton came here, we think, to lie low or meet this partner. His death suggests a falling out. Now, who saw him before the church?" Miss Ellis spoke up, her voice trembling. I did, Inspector. At the Blue Boar on Saturday evening. I was passing by, fetching music sheets from Mrs. Croft. I saw him in the tap-room, arguing with a man, a thin, sharp-faced fellow in a city suit. They were in a corner, voices low but angry. I heard "split the take" and "safe as houses." I thought it was about gambling debts. Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Describe this man." Dark hair, slicked back, a moustache, thin and twitchy. He had a nervous way about him, kept glancing around. "Cockney accent, I think. That matches the landlord's account," Craddock said, nodding to Fletcher, who scribbled furiously. "Victor Slade, pawnshop owner from Whitechapel. Known for fencing stolen goods. We've wired him to come in for questioning." Pettigrew cleared his throat. "If I may, Inspector, this Slade sounds the likely culprit. A city rogue, preying on a partner and fleeing back to London. Perhaps," Craddock said, unconvinced, "but Slade claims he was on a train at the time of death." "We're verifying. Meanwhile, Mr. Pettigrew, you were in the vestry. Could anyone have entered the church unseen?" "Unlikely," Pettigrew replied, his tone crisp. The side door was locked, the main door in full view of the congregation. Whoever stabbed him did so outside, and he staggered in Miss Marple, knitting quietly, interjected softly, "Inspector, might I ask about the note found in Langton's pocket?" "That Whitechapel address, 14 Wharf Lane. Has it been investigated?" Craddock regarded her with a mix of amusement and respect. "We've sent a constable to check. It's a boarding house, rough sort of place. Langton stayed there briefly before coming here. No jewels found, but we're digging." She nodded, her mind racing. A boarding house in Whitechapel suggested transients, a hiding place for a man on the run. But why St. Mary Mead? The village was no haven for thieves, unless it held something specific, a safe deposit for stolen treasure. As the meeting broke up, Miss Marple joined Dolly for a walk to the village shop, ostensibly to buy wool, but really to gauge the pulse of local gossip. The shop, run by the loquacious Mrs. Price, was a hive of chatter. "Heard tell Langton was seen near the clay pits Saturday morn," Mrs. Price confided, her eyes gleaming. "With another man, shifty-like. My nephew saw him skulking by the old manor gate." "Indeed?" Miss Marple's tone was polite, but her interest sharpened. The clay pits again, Langton's boots, the churned earth. And now a second man. Slade, or someone closer to home. Back at Gossington Hall, lunch was a subdued affair, with Colonel Bantry grumbling about city riffraff and Dolly speculating wildly about hidden treasure. Sir Henry, joining them, shared a tidbit from Craddock's latest report. The cigarette end found near the pits was a Turkish brand, rare in the village. "Suggests our killer's not local," he mused. Miss Marple sipped her soup, her thoughts elsewhere. "Or someone local with cosmopolitan tastes," she said mildly. "I recall Mrs. Harmon's curate, who smoked foreign cigarettes to seem sophisticated. It didn't end well." Dolly laughed, but Sir Henry's eyes twinkled. "You're onto something, Jane." "That sanctuary lamp keeps nagging at me. Pettigrew's fussing over it. Odd for a churchwarden, don't you think?" "Very," she agreed. "And the word sanctuary. So deliberate. In my village, old Mrs. Pike once hid her savings in a church font, thinking it sacrosanct. Perhaps Langton meant a literal hiding place." That afternoon, Miss Marple persuaded Dolly to accompany her to the church for a moment of reflection. In truth, she wanted a closer look at the sanctuary. The lamp, suspended by a chain, gleamed above the altar, its silver surface unblemished, save for a faint scratch near the base. New, she noted, and not the work of dust or time. She ran a finger along the pew, her mind tracing Langton's final steps. Had he reached for the lamp, or merely pointed to the sanctuary itself? As they left, they encountered Miss Ellis hurrying. From the organ loft, her face flushed. "Oh, Miss Marple, I was just practicing." "The vicar asked for a special hymn tomorrow." "Of course, dear," Miss Marple said kindly, noting the girl's nervous glance toward the sanctuary. Fear or guilt? Young women, she knew, could harbour secrets as deep as any rogues. By evening, Craddock received word. Slade had arrived in the village, summoned for questioning. At the police station, a modest affair next to the village hall, he sat, twitchy and defiant, his ferret-like features accentuated by the harsh light. "Met Langton, sure," he admitted. "Owed me 50 quid from a card game. Came to collect, that's all. Left him at the inn, alive and well, and the talk of splitting the take," Craddock pressed. Slade shrugged. Figure of speech. He was flush, promised to pay up soon. Didn't trust him, but murder? Not my style. His alibi held, for now. Train records placed him en route to London during the murder window. But Miss Marple, hearing this from Sir Henry over sherry at Gossington, remained unconvinced. "Alibis can be bought," she said softly, "like my nephew's friend, who swore he was at a dance while his shop burned." The truth lay in what wasn't said. As night fell, the village settled into an uneasy hush. The church loomed dark against the starry sky, its secrets locked within stone walls. Miss Marple, gazing from her guest-room window, felt the threads of the mystery tightening. Langton's death was no random act. It was a calculated move in a game of greed and betrayal. The hidden trail led somewhere, perhaps to the sanctuary itself, or to the heart of a village that hid its truths as deftly as it tended its gardens. Chapter 4. Whispers and Alibis. The fourth day since Arthur Langton's dramatic collapse in St. Michael's Church dawned with a deceptive serenity over St. Mary Mead. A thin veil of frost dusted the hedgerows, sparkling in the pale sunlight, like a scattering of misplaced jewels, while the village stirred with the restless energy of a community caught in the grip of unsolved mystery. The murder had woven itself into the fabric of daily life. At the baker's, Mrs. Weatherby recounted the tale with theatrical flourishes. At the post office, Mrs. Price's whispers carried new rumours of strangers seen lurking near the clay pits. Yet beneath the gossip, a taut thread of fear ran through Saunt. Mary Mead, for the killer remained at large, and the word sanctuary lingered in every conversation like a riddle yet to be solved. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in the breakfast room at Gossington Hall, sipped her tea with her customary composure, her blue eyes flickering with the quiet intensity of a mind at work. Dolly Bantry, opposite her, was less restrained. Her fork poised mid-air as she recounted the latest village talk. "They're saying Langton was a master thief, Jane. Practically a modern Raffles. And that other man, Slade, sounds positively villainous. Do you think he stabbed poor Langton over those jewels?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a gentle smile, her knitting needles pausing briefly over the pale lavender shawl taking shape in her lap. "People do love a good story, Dolly. But villains are rarely so obvious. In my experience, the truth lies in the small things. The glance that lingers too long, the alibi too neatly arranged. Like young Mr. Carter, who swore he was at choir practice when he'd been pilfering from the church plate. It was the hymn book he forgot to return that gave him away." Dolly's eyes widened. "You think someone's lying, then?" "Oh, my dear, in a murder case, someone always is," Miss Marple replied, her tone as mild as the autumn breeze. "The question is who and why." Across the village, Inspector Craddock was grappling with the same question. The vicarage parlour, now a familiar stage for his inquiries, was crowded once more with the principal figures in the drama. Reverend Hargreaves stood by the fire, his hands clasped behind his back, his face etched with the strain of shepherding a flock through scandal. Mrs. Hargreaves bustled in with a tray of tea and shortbread, her efficiency a bulwark against the chaos. Mr. Elias Pettigrew occupied his usual chair, his silver hair as immaculate as his watch chain, though his fingers betrayed a faint tremor as he accepted a cup. Miss Lydia Ellis sat near the window, her delicate features drawn, her fingers twisting a strand of her golden curls. Colonel Bantry, his military bearing undiminished, exchanged a glance with Sir Henry Clithering, whose presence lent a quiet authority to the proceedings. Miss Marple, invited at Dolly's insistence, slipped into the room unobtrusively, her knitting bag in hand, her presence as unassuming as a shadow, yet as penetrating as sunlight. Craddock, standing before the mantelpiece, exuded a brisk determination, though his sharp eyes betrayed a flicker of frustration. "We've had progress," he announced, flipping open his notebook. "Victor Slade, the man seen with Langton at the Blue Boar, has been questioned. He admits to meeting Langton on Saturday, claims it was over a gambling debt. £50, he says. Swears he left Langton alive and caught the 6:15 train back to London. Witnesses at Paddington confirm his arrival, and the timing makes it unlikely he could have returned to commit the murder." Pettigrew's lips pursed. "A convenient alibi, Inspector. Men like that have ways of arranging such things, possibly," Craddock conceded, his tone neutral. "But we've no evidence to hold him yet. His pawnshop's being searched for traces of the stolen jewels. Nothing so far. Now, Miss Ellis, you overheard their conversation. Anything new come to mind?" Lydia's cheeks flushed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've thought it over, Inspector. I was fetching music from Mrs. Croft, and I passed to the tap-room window. They were arguing, yes, but it wasn't just about money. I heard Langton say, 'It's hidden where no one will look,' and Slade hissed back, 'You'd better not cross me.' It sounded threatening." Craddock's pen scratched rapidly. "Hidden, you say? That aligns with our theory about the jewels. Langton likely came here to stash them, or retrieve them." Sir Henry leaned forward, his voice measured. "Inspector, any chance the hiding place is in the church itself?" "That word sanctuary, it's too pointed to be coincidence." Craddock nodded. "We've searched the nave, the vestry, even the crypt. Nothing yet, but we're not done. The sanctuary lamp caught my eye. Fine silver, hollow base. Mr. Pettigrew, you cleaned it recently?" Pettigrew's hand tightened on his teacup. "Last week, yes. The roof repairs left dust everywhere. I'm particular about the church's treasures. Old habits from my silversmith days." "Admirable," Craddock said, though his eyes lingered on the churchwarden. "And you saw nothing unusual while handling it?" "Nothing," Pettigrew replied firmly, his gaze steady, but his fingers betraying a faint twitch. Miss Marple, knitting quietly in her corner, noted the exchange with interest. Pettigrew's composure was a polished veneer, but beneath it she sensed unease, like the village grocer who'd smiled through his debts until a bounced cheque exposed him. She recalled the sanctuary lamp, its silver surface gleaming under the chancel light, the faint scratch she'd noticed yesterday. A careless slip of a tool, or something more deliberate. The meeting adjourned with Craddock assigning tasks. Fletcher to recanvass the village for sightings, another officer to check the clay pits for further evidence. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, engaging Mrs. Hargreaves in a seemingly idle chat about the church's history. That sanctuary lamp, she mused, such a generous gift from Mr. Haverford, a jeweller, wasn't he? I suppose it's been in place for years. Oh yes, Mrs. Hargreaves replied, warming to the topic. Since 1890, I believe. Solid silver, though it's purely decorative now. No oil needed. Mr. Pettigrew's taken such care with it, especially after the roof work stirred up all that dust. How thoughtful, Miss Marple said, her needles clicking rhythmically. And the angel statues in the sanctuary, lovely, aren't they? So solid, so enduring, Mrs. Hargreaves beamed. Aren't they just? One has a hollow base, you know. For structural reasons, the vicar says, though I can't imagine why an angel needs hollowing out. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but she said nothing, filing the detail away like a snippet of lace added to her mental embroidery. Hollow spaces, she knew, were perfect for hiding things, secrets, sins, or stolen gems. By afternoon, the village was abuzz with fresh rumours. At the Blue Boar, Mr. Croft, the landlord, regaled patrons with tales of Slade's visit, embellishing the ferret-faced stranger's demeanour with a flair for the dramatic. Kept twitching he did, like a cat in a thunderstorm. Paid in crisp notes too, odd for a man claiming debts. Miss Marple, stopping by the shop for a skein of wool, overheard Mrs. Price's latest tidbit. A farmhand had seen two men near the clay pits on Saturday, one matching Langton's description, the other shorter, with a city hat pulled low. "My nephew swears it was near the old manor gate," Mrs. Price confided, her voice low. "Said they looked like they were plotting something." Returning to Gossington Hall, Miss Marple shared this with Dolly over tea in the conservatory, where late roses bloomed in defiance of the autumn chill. The clay pits again, she mused. Langton's boots, the scuffle, now this sighting. It's as if the ground itself is telling us something. Dolly shivered, her teacup clinking against its saucer. "Jane, you make it sound so sinister. Do you think the jewels are buried out there?" "Possibly," Miss Marple replied, her tone thoughtful. "But Langton's last word was sanctuary, not pits. I'm inclined to think he meant the church, or something within it. Like old Mrs. Fletcher, who hid her brooch in the church organ, thinking it safe from her thieving nephew." Before Dolly could respond, Colonel Bantry burst in, his face flushed from a brisk walk. "Craddock's got a new lead. That note in Langton's pocket. There's more to it." Under a magnifying glass, they found faint marks, like a sketch or code. "Craddock thinks it might point to a hiding place." Miss Marple's needles paused. "How fascinating! Might I see it, Arthur?" The Colonel, ever obliging, arranged for Sir Henry to bring the note to Gossington that evening. Over sherry in the drawing-room, Sir Henry spread the crumpled paper on the table, its pencilled address, 14 Wharf Lane, clear but overlaid with ghostly lines. "Looks like a crude map," he said, squinting. "A rectangle, perhaps the church? And across here could be the altar." Miss Marple peered at it, her mind racing. The lines were faint, but deliberate, like the doodles of a nervous man planning his next move. Or the sanctuary itself, she suggested. The cross might mark the lamp, or one of those angel statues Mrs. Hargreaves mentioned. Sir Henry's eyes gleamed. "You're sharp as ever, Jane. I'll suggest Craddock examine them tomorrow." That night the village was jolted by a new development. A shadowy figure was spotted near the church, slipping through the graveyard just after dusk. Dolly, peering from her bedroom window, swore it was Slade, his thin frame unmistakable in the moonlight. "I saw him, Jane," skulking by the yew tree, bold as brass. But by morning, Craddock debunked the sighting. Slade's alibi was ironclad. He'd been dining at a London chop house, with 3 witnesses to confirm it. "Unless he's got a twin," Craddock growled, "he wasn't here." Miss Marple, hearing this over breakfast, frowned slightly. "Alibis can be deceptive," she said to Dolly, "like the vicar's sister, who claimed she was at a lecture while her shop was robbed. It was the lecture program, left in her handbag, that proved she'd never attended. Dolly gasped. "You think Slade's lying?" "Not necessarily," Miss Marple replied, "but someone is." That figure in the churchyard, perhaps a local, testing the ground, or guarding something. By midday, Craddock's team had searched the clay pits again, finding only a broken pocket-knife, cheap, rusted, unlikely to be the murder weapon. Yet the discovery fueled speculation. At the vicarage, Reverend Hargreaves confided in Miss Marple, who'd stopped by to admire the church flowers. "I can't help but wonder," he said, his voice low, "if Langton's word was a plea for forgiveness. Sanctuary is a spiritual refuge, not a hiding place." "A beautiful thought," Miss Marple said kindly. "But men like Langton, practical men I suspect, speak with purpose in their final moments, like Mr. Grayson, who whispered cellar before he passed, pointing to his stolen savings." As she left the vicarage, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the angel statues. Mrs. Hargreaves's mention of a hollow base nagged at her, like a dropped stitch in her knitting. She resolved to inspect them herself, but discreetly. She had no wish to alarm the killer, who was surely watching, waiting for a misstep. That evening, at a village meeting in the church hall, Craddock addressed a restless crowd. "We're closing in," he assured them, though his tight jaw suggested otherwise. Langton came here with a purpose, likely to hide or retrieve those jewels. The killer's motive was greed, betrayal, or both. If anyone knows anything, speak now. The room buzzed, but no one came forward. Miss Ellis, seated near the back, seemed on the verge of speaking, then bit her lip and looked away. Pettigrew, standing by the door, watched her with an intensity Miss Marple found curious. Was it concern or something sharper? As the meeting ended, Miss Marple lingered, chatting with Mrs. Price about the parish newsletter, but her eyes followed Pettigrew, who slipped out into the night, his coat collar turned up against the chill. "People reveal themselves in motion," she murmured to Dolly later, over cocoa at Gossington, like Miss Barton, who walked too quickly to the station when she claimed to be ill. Pettigrew's haste, it's telling. Dolly shivered. "Jane, you're giving me goosebumps. Do you think he's involved?" "I think," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but firm, "that we're close to something. The sanctuary holds the key, not just to the jewels, but to the heart of this crime." As midnight tolled, St. Mary Mead settled into a fitful sleep, its secrets buried deep but stirring, like roots beneath frozen earth. Miss Marple, gazing at the moonlit garden, felt the puzzle's pieces aligning. Whispers and alibis swirled around her, each a clue to the hidden trail Langton had died to reveal. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring her closer to the truth. Chapter 5. Threads unravelling. The fifth morning in St. Mary Mead broke with a brittle clarity, the sky a pale, unyielding blue that seemed to sharpen the edges of the village's ancient rooftops. The frost had thickened overnight, encrusting the cobblestones with a delicate shimmer, but the chill in the air was no match for the fevered speculation that gripped the villagers. The murder of Arthur Langton, with its cryptic whisper of sanctuary, had become a puzzle that consumed every hearth and tea shop, from the bustling counter of Mrs. Weatherby's bakery to the hushed pews of St. Michael's Church. Each new rumour, tales of hidden jewels, shadowy accomplices, and that haunting final word, wove a web of intrigue that held the community spellbound, yet fearful of what truths lay beneath. At Gossington Hall, Miss Jane Marple sat in the morning room, her knitting needles moving with their usual metronomic precision, crafting a shawl that seemed to grow in complexity as the mystery deepened. Dolly Bantry, her cheeks flushed with excitement, recounted the latest gossip over a breakfast of kedgeree and toast. "Jane, they're saying now that Langton was part of a criminal gang. Mrs. Price swears her cousin in London heard of a jewel syndicate operating out of Whitechapel. Do you think it's true?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles, her expression as serene as the frost outside. "Villages, my dear Dolly, are remarkable for turning whispers into legends, but there's often a grain of truth in such tales. Like old Mrs. Tuttle, who claimed a ghost haunted her attic, turned out to be her nephew hiding stolen silver. We must sift carefully through the chatter to find the facts." Dolly leaned forward, her fork forgotten. "But that note, the sketch Sir Henry mentioned, could it really point to the church?" "Quite possibly," Miss Marple replied, her needles pausing briefly. "Men like Langton, practical men, don't waste their dying breath on poetry. His sanctuary was no plea for divine mercy, I think, but a pointer to something tangible. Like Mr. Hodge, who gasped attic before he passed, leading us to his hidden deeds." Across the village, Inspector Craddock was waging his own battle against the elusive truth. The vicarage, now a near-permanent headquarters, hummed with the quiet efficiency of his team. Sergeant Fletcher, his face ruddy from a morning spent scouring the clay pits, reported a new find. A scrap of cloth, torn and stained with clay, caught on a bramble near the old manor gate. It was coarse, like a workman's jacket, but edged with a fine thread that suggested tailoring beyond Langton's means. Craddock, pacing the parlour, added it to his growing list of enigmas. The Turkish cigarette, the pocket knife, the cryptic sketch on Langton's note. The parlour was crowded once more, though the atmosphere was heavier now, the initial shock giving way to a creeping suspicion that the killer was no stranger, but someone within the village's tight-knit circle. Reverend Hargreaves, his clerical collar slightly askew, offered tea with a weary smile, while Mrs. Hargreaves bustled about, her apron a shield against the mounting tension. Mr. Elias Pettigrew sat rigidly, his silver watch chain glinting as he sipped his tea, his eyes darting occasionally to the door. Miss Lydia Ellis, her golden curls pinned tightly, seemed on the verge of tears, her handkerchief a crumpled ball in her hands. Colonel Bantry stood by the window, his moustache bristling with impatience, while Sir Henry Clithering, ever the observer, watched the group with a hawk-like intensity. Miss Marple, invited yet again at Dolly's insistence, settled into a corner, her knitting a quiet counterpoint to the room's unease. Craddock, his notebook open, addressed the group with a briskness that belied his growing frustration. "We've traced the note's sketch," he announced, holding up a magnified copy. "It's crude, but it resembles the church's layout. A rectangle for the nave, a cross marking the chancel. We think Langton was pointing to the sanctuary area, perhaps the altar, or that silver lamp Mr. Pettigrew polished so diligently." Pettigrew's hand tightened on his cup, though his voice remained smooth. "I merely did my duty, Inspector." "The lamp's a valuable relic. Dust from the roof repairs could tarnish it." "Quite," Craddock said, his eyes narrowing, "but we searched it this morning." "Hollow base, as expected, but empty. No jewels, no clues. Any thoughts?" Pettigrew shrugged, his composure intact. Perhaps Langton was delirious. Dying men say strange things, Miss Marple. Her needles clicking softly, spoke up in her gentle way. Oh, I don't know, Mr. Pettigrew. Dying men can be remarkably clear-headed when it matters. Like Mrs. Crane, who whispered garden to reveal her stolen locket. I wonder if sanctuary meant more than the lamp, perhaps the entire chancel area. Craddock turned to her, his interest piqued. You're thinking of the angel statues, Miss Marple? Mrs. Hargreaves mentioned one has a hollow base. Indeed, she replied, her tone mild but her mind racing. Hollow spaces are so convenient for hiding things. In my village, a choir boy once tucked his marbles in a statue's base. Quite innocent, but it shows how people think. Sir Henry chuckled. Jane, you've a knack for seeing what we miss. Inspector, shall we check those statues? Craddock nodded, assigning Fletcher to the task. We'll do it discreetly. Don't want to alarm anyone. Now, Missy Ellis, you've been quiet. Anything more on that conversation you overheard at the inn? Lydia's eyes widened, her voice trembling. I've been thinking, Inspector. I didn't mention before, but I heard Langton say something odd. Under the wing. I thought it was just talk, but now, could it mean something in the church? Craddock's pen froze. Under the wing? That's new. Could point to those angel statues. Some have wings carved in relief. Good work, Miss Ellis. Lydia flushed, her hands twisting her handkerchief. Miss Marple noted the girl's unease, her quick glance at Pettigrew, who sat impassive but alert. Was it fear or something deeper? Young women, she knew, could be drawn into secrets as easily as they were drawn to romance. Like Miss Langley, who'd hidden love letters in a church pew, only to be blackmailed by a spurned suitor. The meeting broke up, with Craddock dispatching officers to re-examine the church. Miss Marple, however, had other plans. She persuaded Dolly to accompany her to the Blue Boar for a refreshing lemonade, though her true aim was to probe Mr. Croft's memory, the inn with its low beams and smoky air, was a hub of village life, and Croft, a burly man with a booming voice, was only too happy to oblige. That Slade fellow, he said, wiping a glass with a cloth. He was nervy as a cat. Kept muttering about getting his due. Langton, now, he was quieter but sharp. Said something about a safe place, holy-like. I reckoned he meant a bank, but now I wonder. Miss Marple nodded, her lemonade untouched. How interesting. And did they leave together? Nay, Slade stormed off first, Langton lingered. Paid for his pint with a shiny sovereign. Odd for a man down on his luck. Back at Gossington, over luncheon, Miss Marple shared this with Dolly and Colonel Bantry, who'd returned from a fruitless walk to the clay pits. A sovereign? She mused. Not the coin of a common labourer. Langton had means or access to them. And holy-like, that points us back to the church. Colonel Bantry harumphed. Sounds like he planned to hide those jewels right under our noses. Damned cheek Dolly shivered. But who killed him, Jane? Slade's alibi holds, and no one else saw anything. Someone did, Miss Marple said softly. Someone always sees. Like Mrs. Norton, who spotted her maid sneaking out to meet a poacher. The truth is in the details we overlook that afternoon. Miss Marple visited the church alone, her footsteps echoing in the empty nave. The sanctuary was bathed in soft light from the stained-glass windows, the angel statues standing sentinel on either side of the altar. She approached the one on the left, its wings carved in delicate relief, its base slightly raised from the floor. Kneeling as if in prayer, she ran her fingers along the stone, feeling for irregularities. A faint seam suggested a removable panel, but it was sealed tight. No time to pry without drawing attention. As she rose, Miss Ellis entered, her face pale. "Miss Marple! I didn't expect. I was just checking the organ." "Of course, dear," Miss Marple said kindly, noting the girl's trembling hands. "The church is so peaceful, isn't it? A place to reflect, or to hide one's troubles." Lydia's eyes darted to the angel statue, then away. "I suppose so," she murmured, hurrying out. Miss Marple's suspicions deepened. Lydia's nervousness, Pettigrew's vigilance, the sketch's cryptic cross, all pointed to the sanctuary. But the lamp was empty, and the statues unyielding. Had the jewels been moved, or was sanctuary a misdirection? By evening, Craddock convened a smaller group at the vicarage. Sir Henry, the Hargreaves, and Pettigrew. "We've searched the statues," he reported. "Nothing. But that phrase, 'under the wing,' it's too specific." Langton was telling us something. Pettigrew shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps he meant a metaphorical wing, divine protection. Miss Marple, invited yet again, shook her head gently. "I doubt it, Mr. Pettigrew. Thieves are practical souls, like Mr. Bates, who hid his loot in a dovecote, under the wings, quite literally." "I wonder if we've overlooked another hollow space." Sir Henry's eyes gleamed. "Jane, you're a marvel. Inspector, what about the altar itself? Old churches often have hidden compartments." Craddock frowned. "Possible, but it's sacred ground. We'd need the vicar's permission." Hargreaves hesitated, then nodded. "If it solves this tragedy, do what you must." As night fell, the village buzzed with fresh gossip. A boy claimed to have seen a glint of metal near the churchyard yew tree, dismissed as a bottle cap, but fueling wild theories. Miss Marple, dining with the Bantrys, listened to Dolly's chatter, but focused on the puzzle's threads. Langton's sovereign, Lydia's fear, Pettigrew's vigilance. "Someone knows more than they're saying," she told Sir Henry over coffee. "Like Miss Drew, who kept silent about her brother's theft until a pawned ring betrayed him." Sir Henry nodded. "Pettigrew's too smooth." "And Lydia, she's hiding something, isn't she?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice soft, "but it's the church that holds the answer. Tomorrow, I think, we'll find it, as midnight told, Saint." Mary Mead lay under a blanket of stars, its secrets pulsing like a heartbeat. Miss Marple, gazing at the frost-laced garden, felt the threads unravelling, each clue a step closer to the truth Langton had died to reveal. The sanctuary, with its angels and its lamp, was no mere backdrop. It was the stage for a crime of greed and betrayal, and she was determined to see the curtain fall. Chapter 6. The confrontation, the sixth day in St. Mary Mead, dawned with a restless energy, as if the village itself sensed the unravelling of its darkest secret. A thin mist hung low over the meadows, curling around the ancient spire of Saint Michael's church like a conspirator reluctant to depart. The frost had melted into a damp sheen, lending the cobblestones a treacherous gleam, and the air carried a sharp bite that spoke of winter's approach. In every corner of the village, from the smoky taproom of the Blue Boar to the polished tables of Gossington Hall, the murder of Arthur Langton dominated conversation. His cryptic dying word, sanctuary, had become a talisman, a puzzle that held the key to a crime of greed and betrayal. Yet, as the hours ticked by, the truth remained just out of reach, tantalizingly close, yet veiled by the shadows of deceit. At Gossington Hall, Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles moving with a quiet rhythm that belied the intensity of her thoughts. The pale lavender shawl in her lap was nearly complete, its intricate pattern a mirror to the web of clues she was weaving in her mind. Dolly Bantry, ever the enthusiastic hostess, bustled about with a tray of coffee and biscuits, her voice bubbling with the latest village rumours. "Jane, they're saying now that Langton was betrayed by a lover. Mrs. Weatherby swears she saw a woman's shadow near the church that night. Can you imagine?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a gentle smile, her blue eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "Villages are fertile ground for imagination, Dolly. But shadows can be misleading. Like poor Miss Carter, who thought she saw a ghost in her garden, turned out to be her neighbour's scarf caught on a rose bush. We must look to the facts, not the fancies." Dolly set down the tray, her eyes wide. "But that sketch, Sir Henry says it's definitely the church. And Lydia's under the wing. It's all pointing to the sanctuary, isn't it?" "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, her needles pausing briefly. "Langton's word was no accident. Men in extremis speak with purpose, like old Mr. Travers, who gasped cellar to reveal his hidden gold. The sanctuary holds the answer. I'm certain of it." Across the village, Inspector Craddock was marshalling his forces with a dogged determination that masked his mounting frustration. The vicarage, now a well-trodden hub of investigation, buzzed with activity as Sergeant Fletcher returned from another sweep of the churchyard. His report was grim. No new clues, only the same churned earth near the lich gate, and a faint trace of oil on the grass, possibly from a lantern used in the dark. Craddock, pacing the parlour, added it to his mental tally of evidence. The clay-stained cloth, the Turkish cigarette, the rusted pocket-knife, and the sketch that seemed to mock his efforts with its cryptic lines. The parlour was crowded once more, the air thick with tension as the principal players gathered under Craddock's watchful eye. Reverend Hargreaves stood by the fire, his hands clasped in a gesture of quiet resolve, though his eyes betrayed the toll of the past days. Mrs. Hargreaves, her apron dusted with flour from a fresh batch of scones, moved silently, her efficiency a counterpoint to the unease. Mr. Elias Pettigrew sat with his usual precision, his silver watch chain gleaming, though his fingers betrayed a nervous habit of smoothing his waistcoat. Miss Lydia Ellis, her golden curls tightly pinned, clutched her handkerchief, her face pale as moonlight. Colonel Bantry, his military bearing unshaken, stood near the window, while Sir Henry Clithering, his Scotland Yard instinct alert, observed the group with a keen gaze. Miss Marple, invited yet again at Dolly's insistence, slipped into her corner, her knitting a soft rhythm in the charged silence. Craddock, his notebook open, addressed the group with a briskness that carried an edge of urgency. "We've searched the sanctuary again," he said, his voice cutting through the murmur. "The angel statues, the altar, even the pews, nothing. But Miss Ellis's recollection of Under the Wing has us rethinking. Langton wasn't delirious. He was pointing us to something specific. We're missing it, and I want answers." Pettigrew cleared his throat, his tone measured but tight. "Inspector, perhaps the man was raving. Thieves aren't known for clarity in their final moments." Miss Marple, her needles clicking softly, spoke up in her gentle way. "Oh, I wouldn't say that, Mr. Pettigrew. People in extremis can be remarkably precise. Like Mrs. Harrow, who whispered desk to reveal a forged will. I wonder if we've been too narrow in our thinking. Sanctuary and wing suggest a place of protection, but not necessarily the lamp or statues alone. Craddock turned to her, his frustration tempered by respect. "You've got a point, Miss Marple. The sketch, rectangle, cross, lines, matches the chancel, but we've turned it upside down and found nothing. Any ideas?" She tilted her head, her eyes bright. "The church is full of nooks, Inspector. Old buildings have secrets built into their stones. In my village, a smuggler once hid contraband in a hollowed-out pew. Have you checked the altar's underside, or the floor beneath it?" Craddock's eyes narrowed. "The floor! It's solid stone, but we'll look again. Reverend, any objections?" Hargreaves shook his head, his voice heavy. "Do what you must, Inspector. This tragedy must be resolved for the sake of our parish." As the meeting adjourned, Miss Marple lingered, engaging Mrs. Hargreaves in a chat about the church's restoration fund. "Such a burden, these old buildings," she said kindly. "I hear the fund struggled after the roof repairs. Did Mr. Pettigrew oversee those accounts?" Mrs. Hargreaves nodded, her face softening. "Oh, yes. Elias is meticulous, counts every penny. He even sold a few old candlesticks to raise funds, though it pained him to part with them." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind noting the detail. "A silversmith, handling church valuables with access to hollow spaces. Like Mr. Finch, who'd sold church plate to cover his gambling debts, only to be caught by a pawnshop receipt. By midday, the village was abuzz with fresh developments. At the Blue Boar, Mr. Croft shared a new tidbit with a cluster of farmers. A boy had found a silk scarf near the clay pits, embroidered with initials, V.S. "Reckon it's that Slade fellow's," Croft boomed. "Slippery as an eel, that one." Miss Marple, stopping by the shop for a packet of tea, overheard Mrs. Price's latest gossip. A villager had seen Pettigrew near the church late Saturday, before Langton's arrival, carrying a small satchel. "Looked furtive," my nephew said. Mrs. Price whispered. "Not like him at all." Returning to Gossington, Miss Marple shared this with Dolly over luncheon, where Colonel Bantry joined them, his face red from a morning ride. "Pettigrew skulking," he bellowed. "Sounds like he's up to no good." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone thoughtful. "But furtiveness can stem from fear as much as guilt. Like Miss Wells, who hid her brother's letters to protect him, only to find they incriminated him." That afternoon, Craddock summoned Miss Marple to the police station, a rare honour prompted by Sir Henry's insistence. Victor Slade was there, his ferret-like features drawn, his hands fidgeting as he faced Craddock's questions. "I told you, Inspector," he snapped. "I met Langton to settle a debt. He was alive when I left. That scarf must have dropped it earlier. Means nothing." Craddock's eyes were hard. "And the talk of splitting the take? Sounds like you knew about the jewels." Slade's moustache twitched. "Just talk. He owed me, said he'd pay soon. I didn't kill him." Miss Marple, seated quietly, observed Slade's nervous energy, his quick glances at the door. Like Mr. Todd, who'd sworn innocence while his eyes betrayed panic. "Mr. Slade," she said softly, "did Langton mention where he'd hidden his payment?" Slade hesitated, then shrugged. "Said it was safe as a church. Thought he meant a bank vault." Craddock dismissed him, but Miss Marple's mind seized on the phrase. Safe as a church. Not a bank, but St. Michael's itself. The pieces were aligning, like the final stitches in her shawl. That evening, she persuaded Sir Henry to join her in a discreet visit to the church. The nave was dim, lit only by the flicker of votive candles, and the sanctuary loomed ahead, its angel statues silent guardians. With the vicar's permission, they examined the statue Lydia had referenced, the one with wings in relief. Sir Henry, using a penknife, probed the base, finding a seam that yielded under pressure. A small panel slid open, revealing a cavity, but it was empty. "Blast," he muttered. "We're too late." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Or too early. The jewels were here, I think, but moved. Langton's killer knew where to look. Back at the vicarage, Craddock was losing patience. He'd arrested Slade on circumstantial evidence, his scarf, his meeting with Langton, but the alibi held firm. Miss Marple, invited to a final meeting, saw her chance. She gathered them all in the parlour. Hargreaves, Pettigrew, Lydia, Slade, in cuffs, the Bantrys, and Sir Henry. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced like guilty secrets. "Inspector," she began, her voice soft but commanding, "I believe we've been misled by assumptions. Langton was a thief, yes, but his death was no random act. He came to St. Mary Mead to meet his accomplice, the man who helped steal Lady Ashford's jewels. They hid them in the church, under the wing of the angel statue. But greed breeds betrayal. Pettigrew's face was a mask of calm, but his hands clenched. Preposterous, Miss Marple. I'm a churchwarden, not a criminal." She smiled gently. "Are you Mr. Pettigrew?" "A silversmith from London, retired here with access to the church's treasures. You cleaned the sanctuary lamp, didn't you? Not for dust, but to hide the jewels temporarily. Langton came for his share, but you stabbed him in the clay pits to keep it all. He staggered to the church, whispering sanctuary to betray your hiding place." Pettigrew's eyes widened. "Ridiculous! No proof!" Craddock frowned. "The lamp was empty, Miss Marple. "Because he moved the jewels," she said calmly, "to the angel statue under its wing. But after the murder, fearing discovery, he took them again. Check his cottage, Inspector, behind the loose hearthstone, perhaps." Pettigrew sprang up, his composure shattered. "You meddling old—" Sir Henry's hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Easy, man." "Inspector, search the cottage." Fletcher returned within the hour, a velvet pouch in hand. Diamonds and emeralds spilled onto the table, glittering like captured stars. Pettigrew's face crumpled, and he sank into his chair, his confession spilling forth. He and Langton had planned the heist, chosen Saint. Mary Mead for its obscurity. But when Langton demanded his cut, greed won out. "I only meant to scare him," he muttered. "The knife slipped." Lydia gasped, tears streaming. "I suspected, but I couldn't believe." Miss Marple patted her hand. "You did well, dear, to remember under the wing. It made all the difference." As Pettigrew was led away, the parlour fell silent, the weight of truth settling like dust. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her work nearly done. The sanctuary had yielded its secret, and St. Mary Mead could breathe again, if only until the next mystery stirred its quiet heart. Chapter 7. The Quiet Revelation. The seventh day in St. Mary Mead unfolded under a sky heavy with the promise of rain, its clouds low and brooding, casting a sombre pall over the village's thatched roofs and winding lanes. The frenetic energy of the past week, fueled by the shocking murder of Arthur Langton and the tantalizing mystery of his dying word, sanctuary, had given way to a hushed aftermath. The revelation of Mr. Elias Pettigrew's guilt, unmasked in the vicarage parlour the previous evening, had rippled through the community like a stone breaking the surface of a still pond. Yet, even as the village exhaled, a lingering unease remained, as if the stones of St. Michael's Church still held whispers of secrets not fully laid bare. At Gossington Hall, Miss Jane Marple sat by the fire in the library, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm. The lavender shawl now complete and draped across her lap, like a trophy of her quiet triumph. The room was warm, its oak-panelled walls adorned with portraits of stern Bantry ancestors, their eyes seeming to approve of the resolution of the village's latest scandal. Dolly Bantry, perched on a velvet settee, was less composed, her hands fluttering as she recounted the morning's gossip over a tray of tea and fruitcake. "Jane, it's all anyone can talk about. Pettigrew, a murderer, and those jewels, hidden right under our noses in the church. Mrs. Weatherby says he was always too fussy with that lamp, but who'd have thought it was to hide stolen diamonds?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile, her blue eyes bright with the clarity of one who had seen the puzzle's pieces fall into place. "People are so predictable, Dolly," she said softly, her voice as comforting as the crackle of the fire. "Greed has a way of unravelling even the most careful plans, like poor Mr. Sims, who thought he'd outsmarted everyone by hiding his ill-gotten gains in a flour bin, until the baker's boy found them. Pettigrew's mistake was underestimating the power of a dying man's word." Dolly leaned forward, her eyes wide. "But how did you know, Jane?" "That it was Pettigrew, I mean, and not that dreadful Slade. Everyone thought he was the villain." "Oh, my dear, it's always in the details," Miss Marple replied, her needles pausing as she sipped her tea. "Pettigrew's composure was too perfect, like a polished surface hiding cracks. And his past as a silversmith. Such a man would know the value of jewels and the secrets of hollow spaces. Like Miss Barton's uncle, who crafted secret compartments in furniture to hide his debts. It's human nature, you see, always repeating itself." Across the village, the aftermath of Pettigrew's arrest played out in quiet dramas. At the vicarage, Reverend Hargreaves knelt in the church, praying for the restoration of peace to his flock, his face lined with the weight of betrayal by one he'd trusted. Mrs. Hargreaves, ever practical, was already planning a special service to cleanse the parish of its stain, though her scones, offered to visitors, carried a hint of distraction. Missou Lydia Ellis, her delicate features still shadowed by the ordeal, had taken to her cottage, where she played mournful hymns on her piano, as if seeking solace in the music. The Blue Boar buzzed with patrons, mister. Croft's booming voice recounting Pettigrew's downfall with a mix of awe and indignation, while Mrs. Price at the village shop whispered of a dark aura around the church warden she'd never quite trusted. Inspector Craddock, his task concluded, prepared to return to the county station, but not before a final visit to the vicarage to tie up loose ends. The parlour, so often the stage for his inquiries, felt strangely empty without the tension of suspects and secrets. Sergeant Fletcher, his notebook finely closed, stood by the door, his ruddy face relaxed for the first time in days. Sir Henry Clithering, lingering in the village at Colonel Bantry's invitation, joined them, his Scotland Yard instincts satisfied but curious for Miss Marple's final thoughts. The Bantrys arrived, Dolly's hat a riot of feathers that seemed to defy the gloom, and Miss Marple, invited once more, settled into her familiar corner, her knitting now replaced by a small embroidery project. a delicate handkerchief edged with lace. Craddock, standing by the mantelpiece, addressed the group with a rare note of relief. "It's done," he said, his voice steady. "Pettigrew's confessed fully. Langton was his accomplice in the Mayfair heist, planned months ago. They chose Saint, Mary Mead for its obscurity, hid the jewels in the sanctuary lamp, then moved them to the angel statue when Langton grew demanding. Pettigrew stabbed him in the clay pits, thinking to silence him, but Langton's final word betrayed him." Reverend Hargreaves shook his head, his voice heavy. "To think such evil lurked in our midst. Elias was so diligent, so trusted. How did we miss it?" "Evil often wears a familiar face," Miss Marple said gently, her needle threading through the fabric with precision. "Like Mrs. Grayson's gardener, who tended her roses while plotting to steal her silver. Pettigrew's diligence was his mask, and the church his perfect stage." Sir Henry leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with admiration. "Jane, you saw it all, the lamp, the statue, the hearthstone. How did you piece it together?" She smiled, her expression as serene as the village green after a storm. "It was the little things, Sir Henry. The scratch on the lamp, too fresh for mere cleaning. Lydia's fear, hinting at knowledge she dared not voice. And Pettigrew's haste that night in the churchyard. Dolly saw him, didn't she? Like young Mister. Holt, who hurried from a burglary, only to drop a glove that betrayed him. Human nature is so consistent, you see. It tells the same stories, over and over." Dolly gasped, her hand to her chest. "I thought it was Slade." "That shadow by the yew tree. Oh, Jane, you're a marvel." Craddock, his notebook tucked away, regarded Miss Marple with a mix of respect and chagrin. "I'll admit, Miss Marple, I was ready to pin it on Slade. His scarf, his shifty manner, seemed a perfect fit. But you were right about the church. That statue's hollow base. Clever hiding spot, not so clever," Miss Marple said softly. "Thieves always think themselves safe in sacred places. Like Mr. Travers, who hid his poached goods in a chapel crypt, only to be caught when the sexton swept the floor. Pettigrew underestimated Langton's determination and the villagers' eyes." The conversation turned to Lydia, whose role in the denouement had been pivotal. "Poor girl," Mrs. Hargreaves said, her voice soft. "She was terrified, wasn't she?" "Hearing Under the Wing must have haunted her." "Indeed," Miss Marple agreed, her needle pausing. "Young women feel things deeply. Like Miss Carter, who knew her cousin's secret, but kept silent out of loyalty. Lydia's courage in speaking up was what turned the tide as the group sipped tea. The rain began to fall outside, a gentle patter that seemed to wash away the last vestiges of the village's turmoil. Craddock shared the final details. Pettigrew's cottage had yielded not only the jewels, but a hidden ledger, detailing his dealings with Langton and other unsavoury contacts in London. The Turkish cigarette, it turned out, was Pettigrew's, a rare indulgence from his city days, left carelessly at the clay pits. The silk scarf with VS initials, however, was a red herring. Slade's, but dropped days earlier, unrelated to the crime. Colonel Bantry, his moustache bristling with satisfaction, raised his teacup. "To Miss Marple, then. Solved the blasted thing before we all lost our heads." Dolly laughed, her spirits restored. "Oh, Arthur, you're hopeless." "Jane, you must stay another week. Think of the stories we'll have." Miss Marple demurred with a smile. "You're too kind, Dolly." "But St. Mary Mead, my own corner of it, calls me back. There's always a loose thread somewhere waiting to be tugged. That afternoon she took a final walk to St. Michael's, the rain having softened to a drizzle. The church was quiet, its nave bathed in the muted glow of stained-glass light. She stood in the sanctuary, gazing at the angel statue. Its wings serene despite the secrets it had briefly held. The sanctuary lamp gleamed above, its scratch now a silent testament to Pettigrew's folly. How like life, she murmured, to hide its truths in plain sight. Back at Gossington, over a farewell dinner, Sir Henry pressed her for more insights. "Jane, you've a mind like a steel trap. Was there ever a moment you doubted Pettigrew was our man?" She considered, her fork poised over a slice of roast pheasant. "Not doubted, precisely. But I wondered about Lydia. Her fear suggested knowledge, perhaps complicity. And Slade's scarf was a distraction, like the red paint on Mr. Finch's shed to mislead the police. But Pettigrew's manner, too controlled, too perfect, reminded me of a curate who smiled through his thefts until a dropped button gave him away." Sir Henry chuckled. "You see people as they are, not as they seem. Scotland Yard could use you. Oh, I'm far too old for that," she said, her eyes twinkling. "But villages, Sir Henry, they're the best classrooms. Every face tells a story if you know how to read it." As night fell, the rain ceased, leaving the village bathed in a silvery glow. Miss Marple, packing her small case in the guest room, reflected on the week's events. The jewels, now safely in Craddock's custody, would return to their rightful owner. Pettigrew faced justice, his mask of respectability shattered. Lydia, freed from her burden, might find peace in her music. And St. Mary Mead, resilient as ever, would weave this tale into its lore, a cautionary thread in its tapestry of life. She gazed out at the moonlit garden, where shadows danced like memories. "Human nature," she murmured, "so frail, so flawed, yet so fascinating." With a final glance, she closed her case, ready to return to her own quiet corner of the world, where new mysteries, no doubt, awaited her keen eye and gentle wisdom.